Imagine finding out the man you called father had been destroying your little sister's life for years, and realizing the law couldn't or wouldn't stop him. My family did something no one else dared, and when it was over, the scales of justice finally tipped. But the cost was more than we could have imagined. If you've ever felt powerless, frustrated, or trapped watching someone get away with evil, hit that subscribe button. Like this video, comment below, and witness a story where revenge isn't just served, it's meticulously crafted. Trust me, you won't forget this one. Let's dive in. The story begins in the remote reaches of my grandfather's homeland, somewhere so isolated that even in the 1960s, their small log cabin had no electricity, no phone, no access to the outside world. Life was hard. Life was raw. My grandfather lived there with 3 brothers, a sister, his mother, and his father. On the surface, it was just another family struggling against the harshness of rural life. But underneath that rough exterior, darkness was growing. Darkness that would haunt my family for generations. The patriarch of the family, my great-grandfather, was a violent alcoholic. His anger wasn't reserved for arguments or frustration. It was a constant presence, striking out without warning. My grandfather, his siblings, and even his mother learned to accept it. Beatings weren't just discipline, they were life itself. They had no choice but to endure. And because this was a culture where suffering quietly endured, nobody from outside could have imagined the horrors taking place behind those log walls. But while they survived physical abuse, a far more sinister crime was taking root. My great-aunt, the youngest of the siblings, remained at home while my grandfather and his brothers moved out to start their own lives. She became a caretaker, managing the household as my great-grandmother's health deteriorated. But the mother's weakness and the father's brutality left my great-aunt vulnerable in ways no child should ever experience. At some point, the unthinkable began. My great-grandfather sexually abused his daughter, my great-aunt, for years. Most of the time, the house was silent. My grandfather and uncles, caught up in their own lives, remained oblivious. My grandfather later told me he had no idea, though it's hard to imagine the terror she endured when she was so alone. The worst moment came when my great-aunt was just 13. She discovered she was pregnant, and the father was her own father. I can't even begin to describe the mix of shock, horror, and rage that must have consumed my grandfather when he finally learned the truth. That night, a decision was made. A decision that would change the trajectory of our family forever. My grandfather, along with his brothers, mounted their snowmobiles and headed into the frozen darkness. They had no guns, no plan for a clean confrontation. Only shovels. Only the raw, primal need for justice. When they reached the cabin, the confrontation was violent, brutal, and merciless. They beat their father, this monster, to death. It wasn't a calculated murder in the cold, legal sense. It was a desperate, righteous act, the physical manifestation of every ounce of pain, fear, and rage that had been bottled up for decades. The frozen ground beneath them offered no mercy, no give. And in the aftermath, they burned the body, partly to hide the evidence, partly as a symbolic cleansing of the evil that had haunted their family. Life did not magically heal after that night. My great-aunt gave birth to her son, a child of incest, burdened with serious genetic issues. He could barely see, had only one functioning kidney, but remarkably, he survived, thrived, and grew into adulthood. Today he has children of his own. Somehow, despite the horror, life found a way forward. Yet the scars lingered. My great-aunt would succumb to alcoholism, as did my great-grandmother. My grandfather, the hero of this story, also battled his demons with drink. And my father continued the pattern. The trauma stretched across generations. But eventually, it was broken. My siblings and I became the first to escape the inherited cycle of violence and addiction. Psychologically, what my grandfather did was extraordinary, but it wasn't just about violence. It was about the sense of powerless rage, the impossibility of relying on a law or system that would likely ignore their suffering. He had to act because no one else could. And when he did, it was brutal, raw, and terrifying, but it was also proportionate. The wrongdoer, the monster, paid the price he had long evaded. You can almost picture the scene. Snow crunching under the boots of my grandfather and his brothers, hearts pounding, breath visible in the freezing night. The anticipation of confrontation, the cold, the fear, it all mixed with something else, something almost sacred, the need for justice. That need overshadowed every other emotion. The rage was physical, burning in the chest and coursing through the arms as they swung those shovels. And then when it was over, the eerie calm of snow-covered silence, punctuated only by the fire, they started to cleanse the house. The psychological layers are fascinating. On one hand, you have the perpetrator, utterly devoid of remorse, shielded by family authority and isolation. On the other, you have a young woman, trapped, terrified, carrying the unbearable weight of abuse and pregnancy at 13. And finally, the brothers, ordinary men pushed beyond the edge by moral outrage and familial loyalty, forced to confront evil with nothing but their own hands and courage. It's a story that taps into something universal, the unbearable tension between helplessness and the desire for justice, and yet there's something even more human in the aftermath. My great-aunt's son, despite his health issues, carries on life with happiness. The cycle, while stained with tragedy, is not unbroken. There's hope, there's continuity, there's resilience. The revenge did not make the world perfect, it made it fair in that moment. It allowed the survivors to reclaim some fragment of their dignity. This story also teaches a subtle but important lesson about justice versus legality. Sometimes the law is absent. Sometimes evil thrives because there's no witness, no evidence, no mechanism to stop it. And yet, human beings have an almost instinctual sense of fairness. That instinct can lead to horrifying acts, yes, but also acts that, in their way, restore balance. That night, with shovels in hand, my grandfather and his brothers enacted justice that the outside world never delivered. And there's a deeper truth here about silence and secrecy. How many stories like this never get told? How many people suffer because they cannot speak, because society refuses to intervene, because power and isolation protect the abuser? My grandfather's story is exceptional only because it survived the decades. It's a reminder of how fragile justice can be in the absence of institutional support. When the dust settled, the family was forever changed. The monster was gone. My great-aunt could finally exist without fear, even if her life remained shadowed by trauma. My grandfather and his brothers had achieved justice, raw, personal, irrevocable justice. It was messy, it was violent, but it was right. And in that moment, something profound occurred. Liberation. The evil that had ruled their lives was gone, and the survivors were finally allowed to breathe. This story is dark. It's painful. But it also reminds us that human courage and moral clarity can emerge even in the bleakest circumstances. Justice is not always neat. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's brutal, but at its core, it's about reclaiming dignity, protecting the innocent, and confronting evil head-on. If this story made your heart race or gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales of justice and revenge. Share your thoughts below. What's the most satisfying act of justice you've ever seen? Stories like this remind us that courage, even in the darkest moments, can shape generations. Thanks for watching.